You guys really liked that first glue up tabletop video that we did. What we're going to do in the second episode is we have finished gluing it up. We're going to take it out of the clamps. We're going to take off the excess glue. We're going to go ahead and cut it to final length. And we're going to get it all sanded and ready to go for finish. Here we are back at our glue up on our dining room tabletop. Today we're going to take the clamps off. Like I said, we're just going to loosen these all up, get them out of the way. I'm going to set them over here on my bench. Top ones are always easy, and you'll notice that on these clamps, we alternated. Some of the clamps are on the top, some of them are on the bottom, so we alternated every one. Whole purpose for that is if I'm pulling all my energy from one direction, it tends to want to crown a little bit. So if I alternate my clamps, top and bottom, that pressure from both sides will kind of countermand that bow, and it'll help our top stay a whole lot nice and flat. So we're taking the top ones off. That was pretty easy to do. Bottom ones are never as easy. We're going to loosen those all up. Get them all released here. And I always like to use pipe clamps for this because I want a lot of pressure on my glue joint. I want to be able to get enough pressure to cause that glue to catalyze and to have it hold real well, and get a good squeeze out of my glue in there. So let's take these all out of the way here. I'm going to pick this up and slide it out of the way. We'll set it over here on the outfeed table. We're just going to go right on down the line here and pick these all out of here. This particular table ends up being 7 feet long. So I've got 7 clamps on it. It works out pretty well. Let's get this one to come up out of there. Oh, you notice we have the caul on the side to protect the table. We're going to get back and we're going to talk about that again in a second. Those are pretty critical when you're doing a big glue up. Oh, and then we dropped our phone on the floor. Wasn't that special? Well, it's a good thing we can edit. Let's get this last one out of here. Take that out of the equation. Get the clamp out the way. Now I want to talk about these cauls that I put on each side to protect the side of our board from the clamps and the clamp pressure, to distribute the pressure a little bit. So you'll notice this is probably 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch thick, and it's the same as length as our piece. And it's just something we cut off from one of the boards to get it to length. I always take a little bit of tape and just tape that on there like that, so that when I'm putting my clamps on, it will stay in place. I don't have to worry about it falling off like you did on the other side there just now, but clamp them on there. And I try to keep these just a little bit fatter than the piece that I'm putting together. What that'll do is it'll help support that clamp above the object piece just a little bit above my tabletop, because when you get the black pipe clamps, you get the glue on, what's going to happen is some of that glue is going to oxidize, and that clamp, you're going to get a black spot on there that you ultimately end up having to sand off or scrape off later on. So put a caul on there, make it a little wider than your piece, glue it on so it stays in place, so while you're gluing, you don't have to deal with that falling off on you. And then we've got our top out of the clamps. What I want to do now is I'm going to reach over to a couple different means of taking the excess glue and scraping that off of our tabletop. We've got our clamps all out of the way. We've got extra squeeze out on the top of our piece, which just indicates that we have enough glue on our seam to make it work real well. Now I've got to get that off. One of the options is simply to sand it off. Not my favorite option, so I don't usually use that. What I do like is there's a Stanley number 80 cabinet scraper that's basically just like a little card scraper, only it's in a holder, and it works really good at taking that off. And then I've also got a block plane that a friend of mine gave me, and he took the front of it off so the blade sticks out of there a little bit, and we can run that right down on there, and that'll take it off just as easily. So let's take and show you how we're going to do both of those with the number 80 cabinet scraper. Of course, we're just going to get it on there, get our hands held in the right position here, and simply scrape it across there. Works just like a card scraper, only it's a little bit different than a card scraper. Takes all that excess glue, knocks it right off of there. Cleans that seam up perfectly. No more glue sticking out of the top of there. If we got to go back this way, we'll do a little bit that way and get it all off of there. There we go. And then we're going to take our block plane, show you how to use that a little bit. Fortunately, for most of this, I took the glue and I took a damp cloth and I worked the glue off of it before I let it dry. So now that I've let it dry on there, which I probably shouldn't have done, there's better ways to do it. I've got to take this block plane here, use it as a chisel plane, and I can take some of it off with that just as easily. So that sits down there, runs right down the line. There, all that extra glue is gone off of those joints. Real slick, easy way to do that. And like I said earlier, with most of this, I took a damp rag, not wet, but just damp. And what I did is I took that excess glue off of there before it had a chance to dry. Worked out real well. So I'm going to finish scraping all this off, and then we're going to talk about how to cut this particular piece to length, because when we glued it up a little bit longer than it needed to be ultimately, just because it's easier to cut it to length after it's together than cut the individual pieces together and get those all lined up. Now we are to the point of cutting our table to its final length. And as I laid it out in the beginning, I've got my end line here pretty much marked out real well. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take this Festool track saw, which I really like. Really good tool, great for doing long cuts like this across the end of a board. And it's simply a track that the bottom of the saw runs in, and it'll keep that cut real nice and straight and real stable on that board. The way it does that is we've got these two clamps that are going to clamp our piece down. There's a channel under here. We'll slide that under there, bring that right up to our line. Lock that down. Not real tight at this point because I'm invariably going to have to move it a little bit. And we'll come back and slide that same clamp in on the other end. And obviously I'm making sure that this piece is far enough off the end of my workbench so as not to cause any damage to my workbench. What I want this to do is be perfectly 90 degrees from the edge of my board. So I'm going to take my speed square here, my large speed square. We'll set it on there. I'm going to pull it right up to that. And by God, it is right on the money right there. So I'm going to lock this end down. We'll go back here to this other side, do the same thing just to check it out to make sure that we are right on the money, right where we need to be. I like that. And I know from when I did my markings on my board that my biscuits are about 5 inches in from that end line, so I don't run the risk of running over one of those biscuit pockets. I'm going to take my track saw here. And it's got the track here that slides into the track here. So this thing runs in a perfectly straight line. And when you've got a good sharp blade in, you've got it adjusted well, it makes that line on there just about a glue-ready joint. It cuts really, really well. So I've plugged it in. I've got power here. I've taken my saw blade and I've moved the depth of the cut up to about half the thickness of my piece, just because I like to make 2 or 3 passes depending how thick this is. Being 1.5 inches, I think I'm just going to do 2 passes on this, and it's primarily just to make it easier on the saw, easier on the piece, easier on me. So I'm going to get it back here. I'll step over here for just a second and grab my ears. Little Benjamin wouldn't see the humor in my not protecting my hearing when I'm doing this. We'll get our ears on. We're going to cut the first rind through this. I like to take my cord, strap it up over my shoulder like this so it's not in the way. We're going to hit this lever to start the engine or start the motor on it, and then there's another level that releases the headpiece to come down, so it's called a plunging track saw. There we go. Look cutting about halfway through in terms of the thickness. Does a great job of cutting on that. And of course, when you're done, you release it so it comes up. It buries the blade inside the guard on here and let it sit there until it comes to a complete stop, which is what I always recommend. And there we're about halfway through our piece. So I'm going to take the adjustment on here and the stop. I'm going to lower that. Good enough to get us through the rest of it. Now, when I'm cutting this through, I'm not going to grab this offcut piece. I've seen too many people do that. They grab this thinking they've got to hold it, and what happens is that blade is coming through. They end up running over their fingers and knocking the end of their fingers off. So when you're cutting across like this, just let that piece fall where it may. It's not going to hurt anything. Make sure your feet aren't underneath it. Here we go. Ears are back on. Real good there. Come on back. There we go. Let's fire it up and make that cut. And we got our cut all the way through. Our blade is retracted. We're going to pop our saw up off of our track. I always set it on the floor just because I've seen too many tools get knocked off a bench. You set them on a bench or somewhere and something happens and they get knocked off. We're going to take these clamps off of our track and the track saw. Loosen it up. Tim, it'll go off a whole lot quicker. There we are. That end is cut and ready to go. Yeah, I could have taken my vacuum setup and hooked it up to the saw, which I probably should have done, but I didn't. So now I'm going to simply turn this end for end. Like that, just because all my tools are down on this end of the bench. And we got that where we want it. I'm going to go grab a couple clamps quick and hold this down to my bench real quick. All the way back over here on the clamp rack. And we got 2 heavy-duty pinch clamps to do that with. Can you tell I have a lot of projects going on in my shop? I've got tools everywhere, projects everywhere. We've got enough to clear that. I'm going to lock this down onto my workbench so that it can't move. And one of the things that I noticed when I was coming through on my track is it was a little bit on the sticky side. So I'm going to go over here and grab a little bit of paste wax. All your tools in your shop, you should keep waxed up really, really well. It makes them slide a whole lot easier across your material. You can use a lot more finesse than force, and that sure makes a difference in terms of the ease of use and the safety. If it's something where you're putting a lot of pressure to it and having to exert undue pressure to get your piece to go through, you're asking for trouble. Asking for trouble, and if you're asking for trouble, it will find you every single time. We got that set up here. We're going to grab a tape measure quick. And our pencil. I know I want this to be 84 inches long. Okay. 85 and change. Where did my list for this project go? I'm going to make sure I check that to make absolutely certain that we're at the right length. Yeah, and we're going to 84 inches. That's our end length. Let's So we're going to come on here and mark 84 on that side. We'll go back to the other side. Mark that at 84 as well. That way when I lay my track across there, I can mark those two lines together on my track. Gonna put our clamps back on. Set that one right on that new line that I made. Put it roughly in place. Get that lined up. I'm going to grab my combination square again to make sure we're nice and square. And boy, it's right on the money there. Real good there. And here's another point that we should check, because ultimately this top is going to go on this base, and it's going to be no overhang on either sides or the ends. So I'm going to check this to make sure that my measurement for my length is exactly what this is. We are right at 84 inches there. I can go down here and I can measure from that far end to the side of my cut here, which is going to be right on the money at 84. Let's check one more time that this side is right on the money for square. Right there's where that needs to be. These clamps that hold this track down are absolutely ingenious. They do a fantastic job of holding that piece in place. Let's check this measurement one more time. Just triple check. We are right on the money at 84. Let's grab our ears. Let's plug our saw back in. Let's take our cut back to half the thickness. Make sure that wax that we just put on the base of our saw is doing its job, and it slides much easier. Now that we've put that on there, let's get the cord out of the way, get our ears back on. Let's plunge this in there and make our cut all the way across the end of our tabletop. There, we're most of the way through. I drop this down another ½ inch or so, and we're going to make our final pass. Keep our feet out of the way so when that falls, we're going to land on them. And there we go. We've got our top cut to final length. We're done with our track saw. And boy, that Festool track saw makes just a beautiful end on there. That cuts so nice. Keep them tuned up well. Keep that blade nice and sharp. They're going to do a fantastic job for you. There. Our tool is cut to length, and we'll set that on the floor again. I've had a couple times here in the shop where I've set tools on the top of a bench, particularly hand planes. Had it happen a couple times, and people come over, we're doing stuff in the shop, somebody turns a board around in the shop, they knock a plane off, it hits the floor, and pretty soon it's toast. There we go. So now our top is perfectly as wide as our base and perfectly as long as our base. The next thing we're going to get into is start the process of sanding this down completely, and our glue joints are so so right on the money from that you can't even feel the joint. You can see where I marked for the biscuits and all, but you can't feel any of the joints. So it's nice and flat. It's not going to take long to sand this. When we come back, I'll get out the sander and show you what we're going to do to finish the top of this off. Now comes the fun part, which I don't really think is a whole lot of fun. I'm not a big a fan of sanding, but it's one of the things you got to do to get to the perfection that you want in the given piece. So I've got my Merca random orbit disc here, does really well, hooked up to my exhaust system. I've grabbed out some 80 grit and some 120. So as is my norm, I like to mark my grits on the bottom of them just because it's a whole lot easier to see when later on I'm changing the grits that I'm going to use. So I'll probably do this as 80, 120, and then I'll switch up to 180. That'll be about enough. I've got a little bit of a stain that we're going to put on this, so I don't want to go too fine on the sanding part to seal up those pores too much or burnish it too much. Obviously, with your sander, you're going to get your holes lined up so your dust extraction can do its best work. Get those lined up on there. What I like to do is basically do quadrants. So I'll do about a quarter of it at a time, and I'm going until all those marks that I put on there are gone, and you'll be able to see the difference in the color when it goes through. And I can feel I've got a little line here, a little jointer mark, or a little planer mark rather, where it went through the planer. There might have been a little nick in the blade, so there's a little bit of a bump there that we're going to have to take care of, but we'll go back and forth. And the biggest thing with sanding, again, is take it easy and let the sander do the work. You know, a lot of people, you'll see they'll be cranking across there like that. If you go about 1 inch per second, let that sandpaper do its work, and always, always, always make sure that you're holding that sander flat. So you don't want to lean it up on an edge like this because you'll get a gouge in it. You don't want to run it down like this. You'll get a trough right in there. So just take it nice and easy and let the sander do the work, and it'll get it done. It's going to take a while. It's probably going to take me an hour each grit to go over the top of this. So we'll spare you a good bit of that, and you'll see how it's done initially, and we'll come back with a finished product in a little bit. Fire this up, and again, keeping it nice and flat. Start it up off the deck. Bring it down on. There like that. And you can see just the difference in the color and how light reflects off of it. You know that you're going about the right speed. We'll get you a close up here in a little bit so you can kind of see what that sander is doing. Again, if you go slow enough, the sander can actually do its work. Again, as we're coming across there, in the neighborhood of 1 inch per second, this 80 grit. Clean Sport sandpaper does a great job. And you can see the lines there where we put our biscuit joints in. Our biscuits. Each of those black lines marks where we cut the biscuit slots. One more little shot over that spot. Again, don't rest in any one place too long because you'll end up with a divot. You don't want that. What do you think of this new little camera holder trick? Pretty slick if you ask me. So if you look down here, you can see where we sanded and where we have yet to be. So that change in color basically tells you where you've been and where you need to go. So follow that, it works really well. Again, I'm holding this nice and perfectly flat on that board. Making our way down, we're going to run into some glue here and take that off. And normally my first pass, I'll go with the grain. And then when I make my second pass, I'll come down and go across the grain. Again, I'm mostly just taking out planer marks and pencil marks at this point and getting everything flat. Not so much concerned about smooth as just making sure everything is flat. Where there's any deviation in the height from the glue up, it'll flatten it all out. And you can see right there, I've got a little glue that you can still see there. So we're going to work on that spot just a little bit extra to get rid of that. I got a little bit of a pencil mark there. We're going to take that out. Again, continuing to go nice and slow. Second pass on this little section of it. Which is going across the grain. You can sure see the difference in that sanded piece of wood versus the unsanded. Major difference from that is that when the boards had gone through the surface planer, the wood was cut. Versus when I'm sanding it, it's being abraded off, so it's basically being ground off. It just makes a difference in terms of the texture of the wood and the look of the wood. Here we've got our first little segment of our top is all nice and sanded. So with that, I'll continue on, finish this, and show you what happens when we switch to the 120 grit. There we have it. We're done with our 80 grit. We've taken off all of our pencil marks. We've taken off all of our excess glue squeeze out. I'm going to switch over to 120 grit. Got it marked on there. I'm going to switch over to that. And one of the things that some people like to do, really handy, is if you've got a nice clean surface here, if you take a nice soft pencil and just mark the entirety of your surface, that'll kind of give you an idea on where you've been and where you're going. So once you get all of that pencil mark removed, then you're done with that particular grit. So we'll do this today to show you how that's all done. So we've got it all marked on there. Nice pica pencil. Now I've got my 120 grit sandpaper on here. We're going to do the same pattern basically, in that I'm going to go down the board and back, come across, and then I'll go across the grain. And then at the end, we'll go with the grain again. And here we go with 120 grit. We've got there again, you can see our objective to sand the entirety of that surface and take those pencil lines off of there. 120 grit being quite a bit more fine than the 80 grit. This one take a little longer to take all that off of there. But you can see what we're getting there is a pretty good result. Taking it all right off of there. We'll continue this for the entirety of the top. And when all that pencil line is gone, we'll know that we've been over the whole top. And then we'll do it again with 180, and that's probably where we'll call it. Takes it off there pretty good. Using a soft leaded pencil too, so we're not putting any pencil divots in the wood. Not putting any grooves in there from using too hard a pencil. That's what we do. That's how we get our piece sanded real well. So I will continue with this as a good practice, and we'll see you at the end.